This is the most authentic wilderness survival show I've ever seen. 10 survival experts are exiled to the wilderness, allowed to choose only 10 tools from a limited selection. The last one standing wins $500,000. The challenge takes place at Zilker Lake, the highest lake in Canada. Here, contestants face not only the harsh winter, but also the threat of grizzly bears and cougars. Contestant Tim has always loved hunting, with extensive survival experience and hunting skills, easily handling moose and black bears and setting traps. He and his wife have 4 children, making this challenge crucial for him, as his performance could significantly improve his family's financial situation. As the crew leaves, the challenge officially begins. Missing his wife already, Tim sheds tears of emotion, but quickly focuses as he spots 2 partridges flying by. Unable to find a suitable throwing weapon, and spotting numerous grizzly tracks, he decides to prioritize building a shelter over chasing the partridges. Contestant Clay, a video blogger, has captured every local animal species within 10 years. Not only is he highly skilled in hunting, but his craftsmanship is also top-notch. Having built countless bows and shelters, he is participating for the prize money to cover his mortgage and his son's tuition fees. Currently, he is following an animal trail in search of game, finds mushrooms instead, and considers it a good haul, though catching a partridge would be perfect. Contestant Matt is a tough character who prefers the primitive life in the forest to beach scenes. He has survived 7 winters in a makeshift shelter and spent a year living like in the Stone Age. Just after arriving, he spots a moose in the water, but is unable to reach it, watching his chance at $500,000 slip away. Confident in his survival skills, Matt didn't even bring a flint and starts by making fire with wood friction. Fortunately, his years of practice pay off quickly as he starts a fire. Now with a fire source, he begins searching for a campsite, but finds several piles of grizzly droppings nearby and must quickly leave the bear territory. As Clay was worrying about not being able to eat chicken stewed with mushrooms, a careless grouse literally walked right up to him. Clay quickly took his bow and arrow and shot it, securing the first kill of the season. Afterwards, he went to the lake to pluck the grouse, showing his skillful technique. Just as he was about to start boiling water to cook the meat, a strange noise suddenly came from nearby. Clay stood up to check and saw a cougar staring intently at him as if asking, "Is the chicken stew ready?" Clay didn't dare make any sudden moves and kept his eyes on it. The cougar also hesitated about approaching for a free meal. The two stared at each other for several minutes. Clay, growing restless, charged at the cougar barehanded. The cougar, confused and frightened, quickly hid deep in the bushes thinking, "I'm a lion, not a cat. Show some respect." Clay admitted he had been a bit reckless and should have taken his bow and arrows up a tree for a few shots, which might have added another dish to his meal. The next day, contestant Bick was drinking rainwater off the ground, filtering it through his teeth, and ended up consuming several protein-rich insects. An artist of survival, Bick has always been passionate about wilderness survival and rock music. With his wife pregnant with twins, he was eager to win the contest and the $500,000 prize. Compared to other contestants, Bick had significant advantages. His body fat not only kept him warm, but also staved off hunger. Thus, he prioritized building a shelter, only searching for food when he was too tired to continue building. Although he didn't find food, he unexpectedly found a large nail. The rules allowed the use of any found items, delighting Bick, who hadn't brought a knife. He decided to forge the nail into a small knife, hoping to take down a muskox like Roland did last season. Meanwhile, Tim had been unable to sleep soundly for days, feeling as if something was spying on him. For safety, he immediately decided to build a shelter. Although he hadn't caught any game to stave off hunger, he built the shelter to avoid becoming prey to a grizzly bear. Tim's strength and skill were evident as he quickly erected the basic structure, then filled the gaps with stones to keep out snakes and pests, and finally covered the roof with a waterproof cloth. He crafted a neat little cabin that, while not very spacious, at least provided protection from the wind, rain, and bears, and, more importantly, a sense of security for Tim. Next up is the season's first female contestant, Ross. She is a wealthy and experienced hunter. Her goal in hunting 29 large animals seems not to be for the prize money, but rather to satisfy her personal interests. Currently, Ross is busy building a shelter using an A-frame structure. Compared to Tim's cabin, this structure is more efficient and easier to construct, though it is certainly less safe. Clay is making a fishing rod. Before I understood it, he had already crafted a lure. Surprisingly, it's a lure indeed. Clay is truly impressive. While others are still hungry, he is already enjoying chicken stewed with mushrooms. While others are building shelters to protect against wild animals, he has outwitted a cougar and yet continues to sleep in a tent. After just a morning of fishing, he has already caught a fish, using a rusty bottle cap and string as bait. It seems Clay is likely to win this season. On the other hand, Tim is struggling. After not eating for days, he is searching for food. He finally spots a partridge, but a thrown stone only succeeds in scaring it away. It seems he might have to resort to fishing like Clay. Tim sharpens a toothbrush into a lure, ties it to a fishing line and hook, and starts fishing with confidence. However, the fishing ends before it even begins. The wind is too strong, and he cannot cast the hook. Several times, I worried he might hook his own arm. With no other option, he returns to rest. He must avoid a relapse of his heart condition. By the 5th day, Ross has been eating berries for several days. Today, she is moving into her new home. What I thought was just a frame turns out to be her new house. This shelter is hardly bear-proof, and it's questionable if it will last until the snow. Ross has a restless night, as she has eaten too many berries and spends the night vomiting and suffering from diarrhea. Fortunately, she manages to empty her stomach, and her condition does not worsen. Otherwise, she might have been the first to drop out. The camera shifts to Bick. He has finally transformed a long nail into a small knife, which he names the troll knife. While everyone else is busy finding food and building shelters, he fashions himself a nose ring. Perhaps he intends to attract musk oxen for an attack. He then runs into the woods and starts shouting, which seems to somewhat confirm my guess. Meanwhile, Tim is discussing his plans, such as making a wooden door and a spoon. However, his immediate priority is to fill his stomach. He leaves his shelter to try and catch a partridge. He encounters several but lacks the ability to catch any. While walking, Tim suddenly feels a sharp pain in his heart. He quickly returns to his shelter to lie down, hoping the pain will soon subside. However, it only worsens. Realizing it is a heart attack to avoid permanent damage, Tim decides to quit the competition. Enduring the pain, he makes a distress call. The crew arrives quickly, and fortunately, he is treated in time and avoids serious harm. Though Tim's challenge has ended, the others' challenges are just beginning. 10 contestants are currently participating, including 5 women. One contestant, Michelle, has lived in a Siberian indigenous tribe for 4 years. She is a professional survival instructor, proficient in various wild plants, and skilled in making different types of traps to catch prey. Michelle has spent several years living in a cabin she built in the wilderness. Despite looking frail, her husband fully supports her participation because he knows how capable she is. To win this survival challenge, she ate boiled crickets on the 2nd day, stating they are high in calories and fat. She mentioned that 100 grams of crickets are equivalent to 2 Oreos, although the legs' barbs are slightly irritating to the throat. She wondered why not just roast them as they would taste better. The boiled crickets were merely a snack for her, so she gathered edible plants nearby and dug up a lot of wild onions on a hillside. She also found some rose hips and enjoyed eating them by the lake. Suddenly, she was stunned by the sight of a grizzly bear bathing in the lake, which then slowly swam towards her, as if inviting her to join. This unexpected encounter frightened her, prompting her to grab her camera and run uphill. Another contestant, Colt, is also a survival instructor with over a decade of teaching experience in Alaska. He has been living on a remote island for years, where he built a house and installed utilities, enjoying his secluded paradise. His participation in the wilderness solitude was not by his choice, but his mother's, who is a huge fan of the show. Colt once survived 42 days in the wild, so he joined to test his abilities. His first task was to survey the terrain and find food. After searching, he found fresh bear droppings and even handled them to confirm their freshness, then picked some berries nearby. The next contestant you might recognize is Nate from a previous episode where he made an ashtray from animal remains. Nate has 24 years of military experience, having served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He joined the competition as the prize money for 30 days might not be sufficient, and he hoped to win the $500,000 to support his 5 children. Nate admits he is neither a survival expert nor a fishing champion, but he can adapt under pressure. While walking, he spotted a ptarmigan in a tree, stealthily approached it, and set up his camera to capture the moment. He then prepared his bow and arrow, but missed. He joked that it was a pure mistake and hoped it would gain weight before another attempt. Contestant Jordan has been here for 3 days. He found many ants in the wood and had them for breakfast. It is said that 100 ants have more protein than an egg. They taste all right, though a bit sour. After breakfast, he started building a shelter. Jordan planned to construct a good-looking and sturdy cabin. Given the materials, the project is quite large but essential for surviving 100 days here. Jordan is a professional carpenter with a degree in engineering. He can make various traps with wood and has extensive wilderness survival experience. He hopes to win the competition to pay off his mortgage. To conserve energy, he didn't build quickly, especially without a stable food source. It took him a day to build as much. Jordan was sleeping soundly when suddenly awakened by footsteps. It was a bear, likely scared by Jordan's tree cutting. The next contestant, Teresa, is an expert in stone tools, which gives her many outdoor survival skills. She can make tools from stone, bone, and wood. Her job is rare and doesn't pay well, so she values this chance to get rich. Teresa was surveying the terrain, looking for edible plants and a campsite. Professionally, she analyzed some droppings and concluded they were from a grizzly bear, which has 5 times the strength of a human. As it got dark, she quickly found a temporary campsite next to a big tree and set up a simple tent. The camera then moves to Colt, who is quite impressive, as he is the second contestant without a flint. He has successfully made fire twice within 3 days. He believes that making fire by friction is not difficult for him and considers a flint a less efficient tool. He prefers to bring an extra piece of waterproof fabric to make a small boat, which could give him an advantage in food gathering. I personally disagree with this idea. The time and effort spent making fire could be used for other tasks. Teresa found a clear spot by the lake and decided to build a pit house there, the most unique shelter among the 10 contestants. This structure has a 1,000-year history, is warm, and withstands harsh weather, though it is physically demanding. During the digging, she often found small bugs, which she didn't pass up due to their protein content, saying they taste a bit like butter, occasionally finding some stink beans too. After missing a grouse, Nate switched to vegetarian and barely saved 3 mushrooms, only to have a squirrel steal one. So, he focused on fishing and made a type of fish hook called fly fishing, a form of lure fishing using colorful string for bait. Nate quickly set the hook at the lake, tied the line to the shore, and left it to luck. Teresa needed to quickly improve her shelter because last night a grizzly bear was peeping at her. To protect herself, she decided to build a pit house today. After digging the pit, Teresa carried a log from the lake, set it as the main beam in the pit's center, and stabilized it with stones and mud. She watered the main beam with lake water, then built a conical roof around it, securing the adjacent logs with wire to create a sturdy frame, though unsure if it would hold up in rain. Jordan, struggling to find food, had to delay building his shelter. He tried fishing by the lake, but the strong winds made it impossible, risking injury. He decided to search along the lake and found a useful can, intending to use it as lure bait. Realizing he had walked miles and a storm was coming, he rushed home, but still got caught in the rain, feeling foolish upon reaching his shelter. On day 6, Michelle made a chair, relaxed a bit before starting work. Building a shelter was tough for female contestants, so she opted for a classic A-frame structure made of 2 tripods connected by a crossbeam, with logs laid on the sides for walls, considering it time and effort efficient. Colt's boat was ready and looked good, though he spent a lot of time making the oars. The launch was successful except for severe shaking, needing only balance adjustments. Nate was secretly watching a squirrel, suspecting it stole his mushrooms. He decided to raid the squirrel's nest once it left. After a long wait, the squirrel departed, and Nate found his missing mushrooms under its nest. He then built a gazebo instead of a more solid structure like Michelle's, perhaps favoring cold resistance. Later, checking his fish hook by the lake, he was surprised to find a fish had bitten, perhaps proving that laziness sometimes pays off. On the 7th day of the survival challenge, Clay quickly built a cabin to celebrate. He took out a pair of pink underwear, jumped onto the wilderness ATV, and after using the pants, he tied the legs into a net. Some of the fish he caught last time was still left. To prevent it from being stolen by a bear, he decided to hang the fish meat in a tree inside the net. turning it into tasty salted fish for later. After hanging the fish, he started improving the cabin's fireplace. To retain heat and allow smooth smoke ventilation, he used moss to fill the gaps and added a mud thermal layer above the fireplace to prevent long-term exposure from setting the house on fire. The final inspection was perfect. This might be the warmest shelter yet. The camera then moved to Bick, who built the largest shelter to match his personality. The main structure was nearly complete, only needing a roof to finish. Bick was particular about the roof, peeling both the beams and rafters to protect the waterproof lining and prevent fire. Although this slowed the construction, completing the shelter perfectly when his energy was high allowed him to focus on gathering food later. After finishing the basic structure, he also needed to add wind protection. Bick used branches and bark on the outer walls, creating a sturdy and warm shelter. On the 8th day, Matt's place was invaded by a rat. After several attempts, he couldn't catch it, so he had to settle for a vegetarian breakfast. He decided to dig up some wild onions nearby to make a stew. Looking at his messy hair, it was unclear when he might gather some insects to enrich his meal. While he was digging onions, a fire suddenly started on the grass near his campfire. He ran to put it out, thankful that the fire was small and discovered in time, or it could have ended the competition. Afterward, Matt started chopping onions on a small cutting board, making the vegetable stew taste almost like meat broth. After waking up, Clay found the waves too strong for fishing by the lake. Instead of standing there, he took his bow and arrow into the woods. As a skinny contestant, he knew catching large game was key to lasting in the competition. He decided to look for deer in a bush across from him. He hadn't walked far when he spotted traces of a bear. If not for local laws protecting them, Clay might have hunted them. Finally reaching the bush, he found it had been damaged by a fire, with dead trees all around. An environment unwelcoming to both deer and humans. Disappointed, Clay realized he might have to go back to fishing. The camera moves to Bick, who is singing loudly from afar because today is the good day to move into his new house. Such a house deserves a good bed, so Bick gathers some logs for bedposts and then finds some planks for the bed base. Lying down, something feels off. It seems something is missing. He then adds some pine needles, creating an acupuncture therapeutic bed. Now, it feels comfortable with just one word. Next is the housewarming moment. Everything looks harmonious except the door that doesn't fit in. On the 9th day, Jordan wanted to take a cold bath in the lake but ended up shivering from the cold after just half a minute. Mosaics are of no use to him now. He decides it's better to hurry back and build his house. As a professional carpenter, Jordan is very strict about his shelter. The length and slots of each piece of wood are meticulously crafted. For someone with OCD like me, it's simply perfect. After a morning's effort, the overall frame is finally constructed. Although small, it is the most exquisite. He then cuts out a small door and successfully moves into his new house. Back to Bick, after building his house, he tries fishing but, despite his efforts, catches nothing. Not even an animal shadow is seen near the camp, so he decides to swim across the lake to explore a new area. Wow, a one-way distance of 800 meters. Perhaps those with more fat have bolder hearts. No sooner had he spoken than Bick put on a bikini and jumped into the water. Upon reaching the shore, he quickly picks some berries for energy. After observing, he finds this place even worse. The dense jungle makes it hard to spot prey, and even if he sees some, the arrows shot may not return. With no choice, Bick swims back, resigning himself to another dinner of grass. On the 10th day, Michelle starts a live outdoor broadcast with a stick. It's unclear if she's driven crazy by loneliness, or if it's a side effect of eating grass. Today, her main dish, which she calls cowbane, is her first attempt at it. One bite and it instantly overpowers her. Her expression says it all about how awful it tastes. After so many days of eating grass, she can't stand it anymore, so she decides to go to the lake to fish. Using a long, thick stick, she ties on fishing line and a hook, and that's it. It's unclear what she was thinking. At a minimum, she should make a lifelike bait to give the fish some hope. Throwing this bear hook might only catch foolish fish. Check out Matt's side. After nearly causing a forest fire last time, he built a small house over his fire pit. Now everything is in place except for food. He decided to fully commit to hunting. However, he broke down the moment he picked up his bow and arrow, as the bowstring was chewed into 2 pieces by a rat. Frustrated, he cursed so much it could form Morse code. With no choice left, he attempted to repair it. He couldn't give up over a rat. After some effort, he successfully joined the string, and it held strong after multiple tests. It seemed usable. By evening, Matt started making traps to counterattack, using sticks and stones to create a 4-shaped trap, ready to slice any daring rat. This is a wild fishing rod, with a solid pole and pulley seat seamlessly integrated, and a fishing line loop crafted for capturing animals paired with lifelike bait. At first glance, it resembles a lure fishing rod. Whether it can catch fish remains to be seen until it's tested by the lake. Ross, filled with hope, was disappointed. The homemade pulley wasn't as effective as imagined. After a day of effort without any catch, it seemed they had to continue eating grass. That night, just as Ross was about to undress and sleep, footsteps suddenly approached the shelter. It was Big Bear visiting again. To prevent any unwanted advances, Ross immediately shot his bear deterrent, quickly driving the bear away. Switching to Michelle, she intended to install a burglar-proof door on her cabin, but soon became breathless with dizziness, weakness, and continuous nausea. By nightfall, her condition worsened with nausea and stomach pain. She suspected she might have eaten the cowbane, which looked similar to the toxic water hemlock. The only remedy now was to consume some charcoal, which she said would alleviate the toxins. Though it seemed she was on her last leg, she surprisingly made it through the night after severe vomiting and diarrhea. On day 12, Jordan went fishing early by the lake, as he had finished all the berries around the camp. Whether he'd go hungry depended on the fish's mood. Surprisingly, the fish today were cooperative, clinging to the hooks firmly, leaving even Jordan in disbelief. It wasn't easy. After 12 days of wild greens, he finally got to taste something different. The fish could sustain Jordan for at least 3 days. So, he brought the fish home and immediately started acting as if he was filming a cooking show, preparing fish head soup. To ensure a long-term supply of fish meat, he also built a smoke rack to preserve the remaining fish as jerky. How long he plans to eat from one fish, I'd rather not ask. All I can say is he's very handy with chopsticks. Clay spent a day picking berries. To preserve the food, he plans to dig a pit near the lake to use as a fridge. Many people think this season's contestants are weak, but that's not entirely their fault. The resources here are not as abundant as in the Arctic Circle. Additionally, many animals are protected, such as squirrels, grizzly bears, and moose. There are also many restrictions on fishing. It's said that you can't catch more than 2 fish per day, and gill nets can only be used after 45 days. So winning depends on hunting large game. The survival challenge has gone on for 13 days. Teresa's underground bunker is not yet finished. It's too cold to sleep in a tent. She wakes up and warms herself by the fire, which is understandable. But some of her actions are a bit excessive. She decided not to fish today, and instead continues to build her shelter. The basic frame of the pit house is complete. Next, she needs to collect materials for the roof tiles. Teresa found plenty of fir bark nearby, which is not only strong but also abundant. She quickly covered the roof and then filled the gaps with sawdust for better insulation. Her next goals are a fireplace, chimney, and a small bed. Teresa states that as the season's biggest loser, she absolutely cannot let the fat ones outlast her. Meanwhile, Nate is absorbing the essence of the sun and moon by the lake. He hasn't eaten meat for many days and says that soaking up the sun can help replenish his vitamins. It's not that he doesn't want to fish, but the constant wind and waves have been disruptive. His cast hooks are immediately pushed back. So he decides to build a wooden pier for fishing, which can be used even in winter when fish move to deeper waters. The production team claims that such structures have been used for thousands of years, first discovered in Egyptian tombs. However, similar joinery structures were found in China's Hemudu culture, which dates back 6,000 years. After building the pier's support structure, Nate brought several long logs to make a bridge. Next, he goes into the lake to test it. Just as he was about to set the supports, they collapsed. I couldn't help but laugh out loud, but fortunately, Nate isn't easily disheartened. He returned to camp to warm up and reflect, planning to rebuild another day. Teresa's pit house now has a roof. Today, she starts on the interior decoration. She first made a frame with several sticks, then neatly arranged small sticks to form a bed base. A fine single bed was created. With the bed made, Teresa couldn't help but miss home, and even hummed a little tune as she got emotional. The camera shifts to Colt. Many people were eager to see the outcome of his boat building. He did not disappoint, successfully creating an improved model. Due to the instability of the first version, he added external braces on both sides, which theoretically were perfect. As for the actual performance, it would need a water test. Colt tested the boat by driving it in a straight line. The performance was powerful and the hull stable. He then tested drifting in place, and the feeling of control was also great. Colt finally breathed a sigh of relief. To celebrate, he decided to jump into the lake for a swim. However, while enjoying himself, he turned around to find a grizzly bear staring at him. Colt politely asked the bear to leave, but the bear just gazed at him as if to say, "This big guy must be a bit silly." Colt had no choice but to fire his bear scare gun. The bear glanced as if wondering if it was fireworks, then continued to approach. Seeing this, Colt immediately fired a second shot. The bear shivered in fright and stepped back, seemingly angry and about to enter the water. Colt quickly fired a third shot, finally scaring the bear away. It's unknown if Colt was scared enough to pee, but he stayed in the water a while before daring to leave. On day 15 of the survival challenge, Jordan came to the lake early to fish. After several hours with no catch, he took out his smoked fish from the previous 2 days. The smoked fish turned out to be quite good. After breakfast, he returned to camp to continue working. Today, he planned to install a security door on his house. After making a wooden door, it still lacked a hinge, which was not a problem for a professional carpenter. Jordan first chopped a suitable piece of wood, then used a steel saw to cut a groove in it. He then fixed it to the cabin with wire and covered one side of the groove with a wooden board, creating a hinge. He made another hinge in the same way and installed the door, achieving perfection. However, Jordan was still not satisfied and made a door bolt from a tree branch, finally achieving a sense of home. Colt dreamt he was at a buffet, but woke up still hungry. It seemed he had to rely on fishing. He drove the boat slowly towards the center of the lake, picked a spot, and immediately started fishing. He quickly felt a fish bite, but unfortunately, it got off before he could pull it in. This happened 4 more times over the next 3 hours, indicating Colt's fishing skills needed improvement. Just as he was about to give up and head to shore, he finally caught a rainbow trout. Although it wasn't very big, it was exciting enough for Colt. Catching a fish on his first day out meant a good start. The camera pans to Nate, who watches a squirrel darting around in front of him, quenching his hunger with water alone, which is quite uncomfortable. After a failed dock construction, he reflected and made targeted improvements. Testing the new frame in the water, it seemed much sturdier this time. He placed several long logs on top to create a giant fishing platform and attached a huge fishing rod to it, officially inaugurating the dock. Hours later, Nate checked the dock and surprisingly caught a fish. Although small, it proved the platform's worth. Nate took it home and grilled it. What could have been eaten in one bite, he turned into a variety of dishes. Meanwhile, Jordan started showing off his craftsmanship again. While others were busy looking for food, he carved a smoking pipe from a piece of wood. He drilled a hole for the bowl, sawed off the bowl part for detailed carving, and inserted a hollow tree branch as the handle, creating a handmade wooden pipe. To prove it worked, Jordan smoked some leaves through it. On day 17 of their survival challenge, Ross was still eating grass for sustenance. Having had no luck fishing with the rod, she decided to weave a fish basket, hoping to catch even a small fish for stew rather than eating grass. However, her craftsmanship was far inferior to Jordan's. After weaving the basket, Ross casually threw it into the water. Watching her relaxed approach, it felt like she'd be letting herself down if she didn't eat grass, hoping a fish would surrender itself. Jordan was finalizing the design of a wooden cabin, engraving the initials of his family members on a beam, his longing for his family deepening. He decided to open up about his daughter, who had congenital heart disease and underwent surgeries each year until she sadly passed away at the age of 4. Revealing his grief, although somewhat relieving, also indicated a breakdown of his mental defenses. Ross checked the fish basket numerous times, frustrated as no desperate fish appeared. Previously, she could catch fish in the small streams and ponds at home, but it just didn't work in this lake. Ross had to go back to picking berries, although they were quickly spoiling and dwindling. Jordan went to the lakeside to clear his mind, watching the wild ducks and feeling the emotional bonds that limited him. Missing his daughter and family intensely, he felt fulfilled when busy, but sorrow flooded in during quieter moments. Family was the cure for everything, and ultimately, Jordan became the second contestant to withdraw from the season. Michelle has made it to day 17. Today, she found some freshwater snails by the lake. adding another item to her menu which already included crickets and ants. Eager, she swallowed one immediately and found it deliciously crunchy, almost like chicken, though the meat was scant and hardly filling. Failing to catch fish recently, she decided to build a fish trap with a small entrance, knowing that catching big fish in shallow waters was unrealistic. She explained her motivation stemmed from her husband's brother who has Down syndrome. Those familiar with the condition would understand why she didn't elaborate further. With little savings, Michelle and her husband could only care for his brother for 1 month a year. Winning the competition and the substantial prize would allow them to keep him with them permanently. Clay was also struggling. After initially enjoying plentiful catches, he too couldn't land any fish lately, tightening his belt a few notches. To improve his chances, he decided to make a scoop net, allowing him to prevent fish from escaping. Clay's craftsmanship, whether in shelters or fishing rods, was comparable to Jordan's, and his scoop net turned out beautifully. With the net ready, he picked up his fishing rod to demonstrate his skills, but before he could start, the reel fell off. Fortunately, he quickly retrieved it and continued, though he caught no fish despite a morning of effort. Meanwhile, MC Matt was amusing himself, possibly under the influence of strong spirits. Only ever eating wild greens, he decided to try fishing. Despite rudimentary gear, his luck struck immediately, snagging something massive that turned out to be a globe. Suddenly speechless with half excitement, Matt faced the danger of diving in the lake's deepest area, about 300 to 400 meters, to retrieve it. After hesitating, he decided to dive and managed to recover it. Though disheartened by the mysterious start, remembering it was his wife's birthday spurred him to keep trying. Surprisingly, he caught a small rainbow trout, enough for a soup that turned into a full meal with both soup and grilled fish bones at camp. Survival Challenge Day 19. Michelle's actions are quite baffling. Despite being clearly famished, she did not seek food, but went through great lengths to build a kitchen. Perhaps this is what they call a sense of ritual. Today's breakfast was nothing new, just wild grass stewed with more wild grass. She can clearly feel her physical functions declining, not just from eating grass, but also from a lack of salt intake. Michelle admitted she didn't bring any salt, and has been sustaining herself on her own bodily fluids, which you can imagine. She is now desperate to eat some fish, so she went to check the fish trap by the lake only to find it lying idly on the shore, seemingly raided by something else. After a day of waiting, she ended up lonely and miserable. Remember the troll knife Bick forged with iron nails? He has now crafted the handle and guard, making it look quite convincing. Initially, he wanted to use it to kill a musk deer, but that seems unrealistic now. It works well for chopping wood, though. With no luck in fishing these days, Bick decided to create a fishing trap. He mentioned that even with his ample fat reserves, he has lost about 30 kilograms in less than a month, hinting at impending problems. While Bick was seriously making the fishing trap, a strange noise suddenly came from behind. He immediately got up to check and found 2 bear cubs playing by the lake. Bick quickly used his bear deterrent, thankful that the cubs' parents were not around, averting a crisis. Otherwise, he would have had to use his satellite phone. After calming down, he continued making the fishing trap, occasionally looking back. Once done, Bick threw the fish trap into the water, hoping for a catch. Meanwhile, Matt might be struggling emotionally. He climbed a tall tree to enjoy the view, not for any particular reason, but because he missed his family too much. As autumn progresses and temperatures drop, Matt's fat reserves are depleting quickly. He decided to gather some dry grass to insulate his shelter, but accidentally disturbed a wasp's nest, which left him questioning life. Matt is now faltering and mentioned that even if he can't endure, he shouldn't face attacks and ridicule online. He argued that without experiencing it firsthand, one shouldn't have the right to comment, almost extinguishing the campfire with his complaints. Survival Challenge Day 21. Michelle's lips are cracked and her teeth are yellowing. Signs of severe malnutrition. Her weight has dropped by 17%. Seeing that the fish trap caught nothing, she finally decided to use a bow and arrow to hunt around. This hunting method is new to me. She actually sat on a stool waiting for prey to come to her. This was a desperate move by Michelle. After more than 20 days of eating grass to stave off hunger, she no longer had the strength. At that moment, something surprising happened. Michelle said she saw a goose in the distance, so she decided to try shooting it with arrows. After a round, she returned, but the goose did not. Michelle couldn't continue, and her only option now is to call and quit the competition, or her health will suffer. Many might think she's weak, but I admire her, especially how she managed to obtain salt. Not many could do what she did. The camera moves to Nate, who has been sleeping on the ground for many days and now has back pain. To improve his sleep quality, he decided to make a hammock. Nate first made a frame with some sticks, then tied gathered ropes to make a net, and finally tested it inside his shelter. It's comfortable, and he's no longer worried about back pain. Clay has been returning empty-handed from fishing lately, so he decided to focus on hunting. He enjoys and has experience in searching for prey. After walking and stopping in the forest for over 2 hours, he finally found some fresh deer tracks. Clay smiled, as if seeing the $500,000 prize waving at him. To avoid startling the prey, he decided to rest overnight and come back the next day to harvest. Survival Challenge Day. 22. Matt said he was knocked down by hunger. He had to pull himself together and continue fishing at the lake. Singing while fishing, he appeared carefree. Perhaps his singing was too terrible, as the fish refused to approach him. After a morning without any catch, Matt packed up his fishing line, sighed, turned around, and called the show's crew to say he was leaving. He was mentally prepared for criticism. In fact, Matt's withdrawal was expected, as he had shown a desire to exit 2 days ago, but was just preempting any harsh criticism. Now, only 6 contestants remain. After finding deer tracks, Clay set out early in the morning, with his bow and arrows, racing towards the prize money. Upon reaching his destination, he discovered fresh droppings, confirming the prey was nearby. Soon after, he spotted the animal and immediately shot an arrow towards it. The swift whoosh of the arrow excited Clay so much that he couldn't hold his camera steady. This shot was crucial for winning the $500,000 prize. Judging by his expression, he seemed to have hit the target, but he couldn't be sure if it was a vital hit. Instead of rushing forward, he quietly followed the deer. Quickly, he found frothy blood on the grass, indicating a lung shot. Nearby, he found a broken arrow, almost ensuring his success. Indeed, the deer lay in the nearby bushes. Overwhelmed, tears streamed down Clay's face. It was a 60-kilogram black-tailed deer. Although it didn't yield as much meat as Roland's beef, in the current situation, securing a top 3 position was almost certain. The next priority was to protect the food and not waste it to guarantee the $500,000 prize. The most important task now was to quickly transport the meat back to camp before bears could find it. In preparation for hibernation, bears would stop at nothing for food. Without a backpack, Clay had to haul the meat back to camp bit by bit, covering a one-way distance of 4 kilometers. Despite the day's exertion, he didn't feel tired. By nightfall, he had managed to bring back all the meat, leaving over 40 kilograms of prime cuts after accounting for the offal and miscellaneous parts. The challenge now was to consume it within 2 months. How to distribute and preserve the meat became a problem. Storing it in the shelter risked bear attacks, so he decided to temporarily hang the meat in a tree, hoping the bears wouldn't untie the knots. After a tiring day, Clay finally enjoyed his dinner of fried deer heart in deer fat, a meal that definitely required tissues. Meanwhile, Colt was still surviving on wild fruits and vegetables, collecting some each morning as reserve food. He found a place to store this food, and fortunately, had not been robbed by local animals. Unexpectedly, that night, a bear visited. When Colt went to the storeroom for breakfast, he found that a bear had eaten half of his berries, angering him enough to nearly crush his teeth. To secure more food, Colt decided to make a fishing trap. After seeing his work, it was clear he was a professional. Others' traps seemed amateur in comparison. His fish cage was not only large but also exquisitely made. It was puzzling why he hadn't used this skill earlier. After finishing the fish cage, Colt rowed to the center of the lake, tied a rope with floats, and threw it in to wait for his catch. The scene shifted to Nate, who had become skeletal. Desperate for food, he went to the dock to check for any fish caught. Nate wasn't hopeful, but to his surprise, there was a fish on the line. He could see a large fish in the water and was extremely excited. Just as the big fish was about to be landed, Nate's frustration exploded, and he began cursing nonstop. After being hungry for so long and finally seeing a glimmer of hope, the outcome was a severe blow. Clay was worried about hanging the meat in the tree, unsure of its safety from bears and the current temperature not allowing it to last many days. He decided to build a smokehouse to reduce the moisture in the meat and prevent bacterial growth. Clay started with a log frame, added a wire mesh for hanging the meat, filled gaps with moss to keep the smoke in, and finished with a small door cut with a steel saw. The structure was high quality, surpassing other contestants' shelters. After the roof was completed, he cut the meat into strips, hung them on the indoor wires, and started smoking using pine branches. His effort deserved admiration. The scene shifted to Nate, who, learning from a previous mistake with a big fish, began crafting a net from a branch. Over 20 days, he had lost 15 kilograms, largely consuming just Cloud Mountain tea. Nate tested his new net with himself as bait and was pleased with the results. Surprisingly, he caught a small fish, proving his effort wasn't in vain and sparing him from more tea. Teresa's shelter was the slowest to build. After sleeping in a tent for over 20 days, she moved into a dugout only to be smoked out minutes later. The smoke couldn't escape due to the waterproof fabric on the roof, posing a risk to her lungs, so she continued sleeping in her tent until a chimney could be installed. On day 24, Nate was crafting again, this time making a lure fishing rod with even fancier components than Clay's. It was puzzling why he hadn't made it sooner, rather than waiting until he was extremely hungry. 2 hours later, the rod was finished, but Nate started vomiting due to drinking rainwater collected in a pot that contained squirrel feces, likely with salmonella causing nausea and fever. Nate, concerned for his health, finally called the show's crew. As he was leaving, snowflakes began to fall, signaling tougher conditions ahead for the remaining 5 contestants. Survival Challenge Day. 26, Bick went to check his fishing trap but found nothing, not even a trace. After losing over 40 pounds in 20 days, he desperately dreamed of eating fish to regain his strength. With no catch, Bick tried fishing, but his skills were lacking. He struggled to cast the line properly, and I worried he might hook his own arm. After several fruitless hours, it seemed like even the lake gods pitied him, practically gifting him a fish. Thanking the fish verbally, Bick quickly subdued it with a stick. This was his first successful catch in over 20 days, and he was finally able to enjoy a decent meal. To avoid attracting bears with the scent, Bick sang continuously while cooking the fish with wild vegetables. He savored every part of his hard-earned meal. The camera then shifted to Ross. Last night's harsh winds made sleeping impossible in her flimsy shelter. To improve it, Ross decided to add a door. She removed nails from found planks and nailed 3 sticks together to form a door frame, finishing it with some pine branches. Despite her efforts to win the $500,000 prize, it seemed a long shot. Unlike Ross, Teresa maintained her dignity even in survival mode, not forgetting to wash her hair. Today, her goal was to make smoked meat. Teresa collected stones nearby and played Ross Tetris with them. Many wondered what she had been eating these days. I knew she ate some insects while digging a pit, but hadn't seen her eat since. Perhaps women endure hunger better. After a busy period, Teresa's fireplace and chimney were complete. The fire lit well, and the smoke efficiently vented outside. The fireplace would provide warmth in the winter, allowing her to finally move in comfortably. If Teresa can secure food, she might go far. On day 26, Clay began to boast under the spotlight. He mentioned that, although he caught a deer, the future was uncertain as other competitors might also have their successes. Now, only 5 contestants remain, and the competition has entered a tense phase. Despite being the strongest contender and having caught a deer, Clay was not assured of victory. A heavy snowfall was approaching, which would soon deplete the berries and wild vegetables, so he persisted in fishing by the lake every day. Unfortunately, he hadn't caught anything for the past month due to local regulations prohibiting the use of bait. While fishing, Clay was suddenly distracted by a huge creature. It turned out to be a half-ton grizzly bear taking a stroll. Clay ignored it and continued fishing, demonstrating the spirit of fishing enthusiasts. Just as he was getting into the rhythm, he looked up to find the bear approaching him. This situation would be overwhelming for anyone, so Clay quickly climbed a tree to escape. The bear seemed to sense hostility and ran into the woods. Clay climbed down to check the direction the bear had taken and realized it was heading towards the camp, where $3 million worth of food was stored. He decided to follow and check on it to avoid a potential theft. Near the shelter, He found footprints clearly left by the bear. He knew he had to be more cautious moving forward. The scene shifts to Bick, whose cave had a new visitor that had left holes in his clothes the previous night. Despite his hunger, Bick couldn't do much about it. He missed the days when he could eat fish, so he decided to continue fishing by the lake. The path to the lake was covered with snow, and he had to be careful with each step, yet he still fell. Fortunately, the sprain in his ankle was not severe, as withdrawing from the competition over such an incident would be embarrassing. While fishing, Bick sang about his hunger and questioned why the lake god wouldn't give him food. He had intentionally gained weight before the competition, eating crazily for 3 months to gain 41 pounds. But he had lost over 50 pounds in 1 month at the location. If he lost another 40 pounds, he would be forced to withdraw. As the day ended, the lake god still hadn't provided any food, and at midnight, a rat visited Bick, chewing on his arrow feathers. Frustrated from the day's events, Bick was ready to attack with his club. Colt's situation was not much better. Although he had stored a lot of mushrooms, the constant vegetarian diet had made him lose a lot of weight, and he was sweating profusely with little effort. His only hope was the fish trap in the lake. Paddling out in his boat to check the traps, Colt felt a strong resistance as he pulled up the rope. It was like a tug of war. Excited at first, he found it increasingly difficult to pull. The fish trap seemed to be stuck on the seabed. Having put significant effort into making the trap, Colt tried his utmost to retrieve it but couldn't. Reluctantly, he cut the rope and abandoned the trap, returning to shore disheartened. Teresa is treating her wounds after a near miss while fishing yesterday. She spent hours by the fire to recover, only to discover burns on her inner thigh and blisters on her knee today. Her thermal pants also got burned. After taking care of her knee and pants, she went to check her fishing lines by the lake. Sadly, not only was there no catch, but the lines had frozen. Thinking about the risks she took to set them up, Teresa felt utterly hopeless and burst into tears by the shore. It's day 34 of the challenge. Bick has noticeably lost a lot of weight. To add some charm, he decides to braid his beard into a ponytail today. After spending the day fishing without any catch, he battles a rat at night. Holding a club and repeatedly saying, "I'm going to kill you," he is furious because the rat damaged his ankle guard and left droppings on it as an insult. Now, Bick and the rat are sworn enemies. On day 35, Ross, having eaten a rabbit 2 days ago, hopes to catch another. Unfortunately, after checking the traps, not only is there no catch, but there are also many bobcat tracks nearby. Even if he catches a rabbit, a bobcat might snatch it first. With no other options, Ross heads back to the shelter. After walking around, his toes start to sting. Removing his shoes at the shelter, he discovers 2 toes have turned purple from frostbite, a sign of deep frostbite that could lead to necrosis without prompt treatment. Finally, we switch to Clay, who must look the part as a leader. His genuine leather sofa is ready, and sitting on it with a wooden teacup is extremely comfortable. As he enjoys his tea in the sun, he wonders what the other contestants would think if they saw him now. While Clay relaxes, his moment is ruined by an unexpected visitor, the grizzly bear from a few days ago, apparently fond of his food. Armed with a bow and arrows, Clay is ready to deter the bear for good. He wants the bear to know he is not to be messed with, and that his food is not easily taken. Approaching the smokehouse, Clay stops, sensing the bear nearby. Suddenly, a dark figure lunges at him from behind a tree. Luckily, Clay is quick and sprays the bear with bear repellent, causing it to flee. Not scared, but exhilarated, Clay believes the bear will no longer covet his deer meat. He patrols the area, shouting, "Get out of my camp and don't come back." Day 36. Teresa hasn't eaten in days. Her fishing lines set up days ago have caught no fish. She had to search nearby for wild vegetables and fruits. While walking, she suddenly found a stranded small fish and excitedly picked it up. It was the first fish she had seen since the competition started. Just when she thought she was lucky, she found another larger fish that had drowned a short distance away. Her survival in the wilderness turned into scavenging. Such fish with unknown causes of death may carry deadly bacteria and are not recommended for eating. However, Teresa didn't care. After processing the fish by the lake, she happily returned to camp. Teresa, who had never eaten meat before, found it delicious. Day 37. Ross's shelter is frosted over. His frostbite has worsened, making walking difficult. He planned to get the rabbit meat left from a few days ago and make some soup to warm up. However, he started feeling dizzy and heard ringing in his ears before he could get there. This wasn't caused by frostbite, but severe malnutrition. Ross felt he couldn't continue and wanted to call the rescue team, but he didn't carry the communication pack, which was mandatory. Fortunately, the production team sends messages to contestants regularly. If a contestant does not respond within the set time, the rescue team is dispatched immediately. After examining Ross, the medical team diagnosed him with severe malnutrition and frostbite, requiring him to leave the contest and be hospitalized to avoid life-threatening risks. Although reluctant, Ross physically couldn't continue. After more than 30 days, having eaten only half a rabbit, walking was a struggle. He had to be carried onto the boat. With Ross's departure, only 4 contestants remained, all looking forward to day 45 when they could set gill nets for fishing. Colt, aiming for the $3 million prize, survived over 30 days in this survival challenge. He hoped to find animal tracks after the snowfall but found none near the camp. He tried fishing again and unexpectedly found a dead bird floating quietly on the lake's surface. After Teresa found 2 dead fish, Colt also found food. Many suspected these were staged by the production team, but the dissected bird, filled with worms in its organs, dispelled such thoughts. Eating such food could be deadly. However, Colt, having lost 60 pounds, dreamt of eating a meal of bird and mushroom stew. This could help him survive until day 45, when he could set fishing nets. The turning point for victory would come then, provided his health held up. Day 38, Bick shivered inside the cabin, curled up from the cold. His shelter looked big and sturdy, but he hadn't sealed the gaps around the roof and walls. With temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees, he planned to upgrade it in one day. Bick collected moss from around the camp and brought it inside. Next was the long and tedious process of filling the gaps. Once done, he lit the fireplace, instantly warming the shelter. With day 45 approaching, Bick started making fishing nets early, confident in his gill net fishing skills. After some busy time, he finally crafted the net, expertly made. The next few days would be tough. To pass the time until he could fish, he meticulously made a wooden soup spoon, cut off excess belt material to make a sheath for his troll knife, and even crafted a sign for his shelter. Since finding the dead fish, Teresa walked with her head down every time she came to the shore. Not every trip was lucky. Today, although she didn't find any dead fish, she unexpectedly found half a packet of rose hips. She went back to the shelter to continue making fish traps. Previously, while processing the dead fish by the lake, she noticed many small fish eating its organs. Since fishing seemed hopeless, she thought catching small fish for soup might work. Teresa had set an anchor in the lake center and planned to use the fish line on the anchor as a slide rope to send the fish cage into deeper water without entering the water. The plan sounded perfect, but the fish cage got stuck halfway. Teresa pulled hard, but it wouldn't budge. She enjoyed the challenge, though it puzzled her why she couldn't just add some stones or roll up her pants to solve the depth issue. She deeply suspected it was a performance for her benefit. Colt was the most likely to catch big fish. Other contestants, even if they made gill nets, would struggle to place them in deep water. Colt was different. His small boat paired with a professional gill net might turn the tide in this survival challenge. His meticulously made floats showed his high standards for gill netting, taking a whole day to make. At 2 a.m., a fierce wind woke Colt. He worried about his boat by the lake. Upon checking, he found minor damage. He reinforced it before daring to go back to sleep. Finally, day 45 arrived, and the contestants could use their gill nets. Colt immediately reinforced his boat after waking up. Winning the $3 million depended on this boat, and he didn't want to fail at this critical moment. He installed new keels inside the boat, making it much sturdier than before. Ready, Colt took his net and headed for the deep water to find a suitable spot to set it. The camera shifts to Bick's side. He's been unable to sleep since before dawn. A few days ago, he had prepared his fishing net, looking forward to this day. To ensure his net could reach deeper waters, Bick cut down a slim long tree to use as a pole. During the net-making process, he noted his weight loss, having successfully lost 60 kilograms. The net has become his hope to persevere. After some busy preparations, the net finally entered the water. He then secured the pole with stones and waited for a miracle to happen. And a miracle did occur. 2 bears from the bear family, thinking Bick was a clothed companion, slowly swam towards him. Bick quickly shouted at them and sounded his bear whistle, causing the bears to reluctantly leave. The scene switches to Clay, who seems to spend more time eating and sleeping, which is why his footage is only now appearing. While others are hurriedly casting their nets, he has started a leisure project. The moss is not for decorating his home, but for making archery targets. After the leisure activity, Clay also began to set up his fishing net. To reach deeper waters, he had previously placed an anchor in the lake and was now making a pulley system on shore. The structure was made with a stable triangular framework, and the top was equipped with a wire loop, allowing for easy handling of the net. As Clay explained his setup, he suddenly saw a chance for food. A duck was feeding nearby. Clay drew his bow fully and fired without aiming, deciding to let the duck go after all. This missed shot wasn't due to poor archery skills, but because the waves pushed the duck up by a centimeter. Clay then continued to set up his net. After witnessing his flashy moves, it's hard not to criticize Clay a bit. He often uses a strategy of pretending ignorance, but ended up making the largest net and constructing a complete trawling system. Finally, it's Colt's time to collect his net. Given that his net was in a deeper area, the chances of catching big fish were high. As Colt started pulling the rope, 2 large fish gradually surfaced. Bick has survived over 60 days in the wild, with nearby berries and wild vegetables now depleted. Out of necessity, he had to resort to eating a small tree. He cut down the tree trunk and the inner bark layer with a sense of guilt. Although pine meat contains digestible sugars and starch, the side effects are significant, including nausea, constipation, and dizziness. But when Bick thinks of his unborn child and his current unsuccessful situation, he must find a way to keep going. After cooking the bark, Bick treated it like a pot of meat soup because cooked pine bark really resembles it. He had seen other contestants withdraw because of eating bark, so he avoided meat and wanted just to drink some soup for energy. However, the taste of this soup was quite challenging to swallow. Even though Bick was extremely hungry, he could only manage a few sips. Bick hadn't stopped looking for other food sources. He had moved his fishing net to a new location a few days ago and checked it regularly. The outcome was the same as usual. Not only did the net fail to catch fish, but he also couldn't find anything along the shore. Thinking of how Sam from Season 5 managed by enduring hunger, Bick believed he could do the same. Snow flurries outside the shelter where Teresa crafts by hand. Watching her whittle sticks for broom handles, I worry she might cut herself like last time. After finishing the broom, she tests its effectiveness. However, living off berries has left her nearly too weak to stand, causing dizziness after a few sweeps. She has to rest again, but the fire inside has gone out. Exhausted, she gathers firewood and unexpectedly finds deer tracks, boosting her spirits. Catching a deer would win her $500,000, but her physical state makes it unrealistic. With no choice, she returns to the shelter with the firewood on day 69, emaciated but still washing her underwear, showing her innate refinement. After resting, she receives a message for a routine medical check. Fearing disqualification, she undergoes an examination, revealing her weight has dropped to 84 kilograms and her heart rate has increased by 20%. Doctors warn of permanent damage or even heart failure if she stays. For safety, she must leave. Teresa tearfully asks for a moment alone to wipe her tears, as she dislikes crying in front of others. Disappointed yet understanding, she knows she must go. Her resilience as a girl is admirable. Now, only Bick and Clay remain in a final showdown. Who will win the $500,000? A mysterious creature appears at the camp late at night. Clay, who was sound asleep, is startled but stays inside since his deer meat ran out 3 days ago, not fearing any loss. Facing a food crisis with his weight down 20%, he checks his fishing net first thing in the morning, only to find it tangled and empty. Realizing he cannot waste more time on it, he decides to hunt in the forest. Bick fares worse, suffering from indigestion after eating bark. Knowing this can't continue, he arms himself with a bow and arrow. Just when I expect to witness his hunting, he spots wild onions and can barely move. Throwing aside his bow, he starts digging, salivating at the thought. His excitement surpasses that of a wedding. Back at camp, he fries and stews the onions, finding them more delicious than a seafood feast. With food, Bick's confidence grows, guessing at most one competitor remains. Determined for his 2 daughters, he perseveres. The camera shifts to Clay. He hasn't eaten for several days. He set a few traps in the forest the day before yesterday to catch rabbits. Though the first trap had footprints nearby, it was empty. However, the second trap caught a snow hare, a timely blessing amid hardship, providing enough energy for at least 3 days. It's hard not to win with such luck, yet Clay wondered why he hadn't started trapping earlier. Why hadn't the other contestants thought of hunting rabbits? After catching the rabbit, Clay performed a mukbang that night, savoring his food more than ever. He even made boiled rabbit head taste spicy and crispy, making me crave a taste too. That night, while Clay slept soundly, he suddenly heard noises outside. Cautiously, he opened the door and found a fisher, a relative of the honey badger with strong aggression and skilled at hunting rodents, including lynxes and porcupines. Clay worried about his traps, fearing the fisher might have gotten to his catch first. As for why he didn't treat the fisher as a takeaway delivery, you'll find out later. On day 70 of the challenge, Clay's belt no longer fit, a clear sign of his weight loss. His first task was to check the traps, and his suspicions were confirmed. A sense of foreboding arose as he found fisher tracks nearby, likely having checked the traps before him. Even if the traps caught rabbits, the fisher might have intercepted them. Indeed, Clay found rabbit fur and blood on the ground, indicating the unfortunate fate of the rabbit, critical for his $500,000 prize. Frustrated and helpless against the fisher due to the rules prohibiting harm, Clay contemplated tying it up until the contest ended. On day 71, Bick missed his home, but to win the $500,000 prize, he had to keep looking for food. Visibly weak, he needed to slide down to the lake for water and relied solely on nature's gifts. Returning to camp, Bick experienced palpitations, feeling dizzy and nearly collapsing. He had to sit down in his shelter to rest, struggling to hold on, apologizing to his wife while wiping away tears. Clay was also thinking about his wife. They have been together since they became adults. This period of solitary wilderness survival was the longest they had ever been apart. Clay took out a family photo which he had been afraid to look at, fearing it would make him homesick. Sure enough, as soon as he saw his wife and children, he couldn't stop the tears from flowing. On day 73, Bick finally couldn't hold on any longer. To join the Wilderness Survival Challenge, he had quit his job, putting all his eggs in one basket, hoping to improve his family's life. However, his body couldn't take it anymore. Over 70 days, he had only eaten 2 small fish and relied on wild vegetables and berries. He had endured enough for his family. Although his performance wasn't very exciting, I think he didn't disgrace himself. I believe he can definitely be a good father. With Bick's departure, Clay became the season's final winner, though he was unaware of this at the time and still worried about failing the medical checkup. The production team, quite mischievously, kept a straight face when they saw him, conducted a series of medical exams, and then asked if he could continue. Clay seriously claimed he could last 90 days, to which the crew responded, "It's time to go home, buddy. You've been here longer than anyone else." This season's story ends here. Clay's victory was well deserved. If you liked it, please follow my channel.